Tonight we're going to be talking about rabbit management in the peri-urban environment. And tonight myself, Garry Kneebone and Neil Devanny will be talking about sort of rabbit management. But we've also got Vanessa Thompson and Andrew Snowden from the rural city of Wangaratta that have joined us. So I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all gather today and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge that this webinar tonight is supported by the rural city of Wangaratta through funding from the Australian Government initiatives, Communities Combating Pest and Weed Impacts During Drought program. So our presenters tonight are Garry Kneebone, who is a local contractor with many years experience in the pest, plant and animal management area. Along with his partner Kylie, he runs G&K Weeds, which is based at Raleigh, and deliver pest, plant and animal management solutions to landholders, Landcare and government organisations across the local area and broader afield. Neil Devanny is a mentor and committee member of the Victorian Rabbit Action Network, which is led by a steering group of committee members, government representatives and industry leaders who, with the support of their executive officer Heidi, facilitate opportunities and strategies to support community-led rabbit action. Neil is also a member of the Goulburn Valley Landcare Group Committee and Granite Creeks Incorporated project. Myself, I'm a project officer with supporting the delivery of the weed management program with private landholders under the grant. I've also been involved with Landcare for over 12 years and supported the delivery of sustainable agriculture, landscape restoration and pest, plant and animal management across Landcare communities. In the last year, I participated in the Victorian Rabbit Action Network boot camp on supporting best practice management for rabbits. Vanessa, who will help facilitate questions that are coming in tonight, is the Natural Resource Management Officer with the rural city of Wangaratta. And Andrew Snowden is the Natural Resource Management Team Leader with the rural city of Wangaratta. So it's great to have everyone on board tonight. I'd also like to remind everyone, if you can please use your Q&A section or the chat section to put your questions into as we're going along. And we'll actually try and answer the questions as we're going, as opposed to holding them to the end of the presentation tonight. So I'd like to start by just giving you a few facts, if I can get my slides to change. Here we go. So a few facts on the rabbits. So rabbits were introduced into Australia in 1959 for sport. So they soon exploded and discovered that Australia was a very good place to live and reproduce, and certainly did that very well over the years and have spread right across Australia. So just to give you an idea of sort of how quickly they can start reproducing, a single rabbit female can produce kittens from 4 months of age, so that's a pretty good young age to start breeding. And if you have one burrow and one pair of rabbits, they can accumulate to over 180 rabbits in just 18 months. So you can have a very small problem to start with and it can become a very large problem very quickly. So a lot of the time we sort of get asked as to why do we actually need to control rabbits? So rabbits are actually a declared pest in Victoria. Now the CalPAC Act is a legislation within Victoria that lists various weeds and animals that are required by landowners and that to be managed. So we actually have a legal responsibility to manage and control the rabbits that are on our land. So that is relevant to private landholders and all other government landholders as well. And many organisations, certainly our rural city of Wang, certainly works hard with our local communities as well to do their bit in managing our rabbit populations and our problems. The other part is that it actually helps our native flora and fauna to thrive. So rabbits will come into a lot of our bushland area. They will certainly take out a lot of the smaller orchids, wildflowers, native grasses, and that then removes a lot of those species for food for our smaller mammals, and also a lot of the seed and that our birds and stuff would potentially utilise. And it's also a good way of protecting your buildings and gardens from damage. So particularly in our urban landscape, rabbits can get in under our houses, sheds. They can create issues around underneath your concrete slabs and footings on buildings, and they can also get into your gardens and do a lot of damage, which I'm sure many of you have experienced in the past. So there's some basic steps we can sort of look at around rabbit management, and that particularly in our, well, not necessarily just our urban landscape, but they are pretty particular to being able to do it well in an urban landscape as well. So one of the first steps is around developing a plan. So one of the reasons that we need to sort of do a plan is so that we implement the right management practice at the right time, because there are certain things that we can actually do to control rabbits that are best undertaken at certain times of the year. And we'll discuss those a little bit more as we go along and learn how those actually apply. The other part of actually having a plan is to be able to help you monitor your success. Rabbit management, like many things, it actually might take more than one attempt to actually do it well and achieve what you're looking for. So by actually having a plan of how you're going to do it and monitoring that through our management plan, enables you to actually improve on your outcomes, or at least know whether you are making some improvement in your issue with rabbits. So the things that you should look at putting into your plan are really about understanding what your problem is, then developing a management timeline, and then using a follow-up schedule. So we'll talk a little bit more about these things as we go along. So yeah, understanding what goes into your plan. You want to certainly look at having things like implementing what you need to actually implement in your plan. So monitoring is probably your first step. And then the next one is understanding about what are the control options you have to put in place. So we're going to talk about habitat reduction tonight, exclusion control methods, and fumigation and baiting control methods. So monitoring is certainly a key part of any plan, and it's really where you need to start with your rabbit management. If you really don't understand your problem, then it's very hard to know what are the best management methods for you to actually undertake on your property. So one of the easiest things you can do is go out after dark and do a bit of a spotlight, wander around the streets and see where the rabbits are and do some counts. So this can be done just using a handheld spotlight, and it gives you an idea of potentially where your rabbits are heading back to, and also the numbers that you're actually sort of looking at. So for every rabbit that you count, there's a corresponding number that are sitting in a burrow still, or hidden somewhere that you don't see. The other way is to have a look around along your nature strip or in your garden and other habitat areas around where you live, to have a look at what are the activities is. So are there diggings, are there dung heaps? And some groups have used motion cameras and stuff that you can get to be able to monitor in some of those areas. So once we've got a bit of an idea of what our problem is, we can then start looking at actually what do we need to do. So one of the options that you have in actually starting to manage your rabbit problem around your property is actually looking at reducing the habitat. So that doesn't mean go out and chop up every bit of timber in a bushland area or remove every bit of timber from your property. It's about looking at the key areas that provide harbour. So that could be a burn pile that you haven't got around to moving yet. It could be denying access to your firewood stock area, which can be done through using netting or something along those lines to stop them from being able to get in there. And also then looking at how do you actually exclude them from around your house and under your buildings. And that can be again done through using netting and wire and that to limit their access into those areas. And then you also need to sort of think about monitoring those as well. And the other key thing is if you can find burrows and get them closed down, that's a really good way. So the more you can exclude them from actually having somewhere to live and produce, the less rabbit problem you will have long term. It's the best way to actually get on top of a rabbit problem in a longer term. So Garry or Neil, is there anything on that particular around habitat sort of reduction that you want to add?
Yeah, just a few pointers that exactly what you said at the start. As soon as you've got a burrow, basically one burrow and one pair of rabbits, it's possible to breed up to 180 rabbits in 18 months. And that's where it all boils down to. A lot of people will say, oh, but I've only got a few rabbits. But how many is a few? They may have 8, or they might see 8 rabbits and find out they got 18 rabbits. Well, look at the potential of that. So, yeah, you're right there. And closing down the burrows is one of the key elements to it all. Because if they've got nowhere to breed, they are very limited on this success of breeding kittens in grasses and that sort of thing, because the predators, we've got a lot of foxes around and cats and every other predator around. While they haven't got a den to go back to, they are limited to how many they can breed in a 12-month period. So, yeah, keep your burrows, excluding them from burrows, and as you say, wood piles, those sorts of things. A lot of people have trouble with hedges and that, where they can get in under bushes, under blackberries, that sort of thing. They can still breed in those circumstances because they've got good habitat. But if you can, and it's not hollow logs and all that, because a goanna can still go in there and eat them in a hollow log, and half the hollow logs fox will get into. So really, it's burrows and under bushes and that, where they can get protection from hawks and all that sort of thing. So that's the biggest key point to keep your numbers down. Yeah.
Garry, I just had a question about the best way to go about closing burrows. So if you find a burrow that's just dug into the ground, what is some of the methods you could use to close them off? You
can just simply use a shovel and bury them, like close them down. You can put rocks. You need to just simply putting dirt over a hole is very minimal. Even if you're using Firouztoxin tablets and fumigating them, you have a really high rate of holes reopen after that. You must be persistent and keep going back and keep closing them down, because the issue with the tablets, every time you Firouztoxin a rabbit warren and there's rabbits in it, when the rabbits die, they give off an odour, and then the foxes will come along and reopen the holes because they can smell a dead rabbit. So they open it up to try and get a rabbit out. And then then the air purges out, and within days you've got rabbits habitat in that hole, re-inhabiting that hole again. So you've got to be persistent with these things. If you can actually fill the holes in when there's no rabbits in there, you've got more chance of actually destroying them. Whether you use a crowbar and break them back, a pick or whatever, you push them back as far as you can, big rocks in them, bricks, anything like that. If you put in there, put a barrier so they have trouble opening the holes again, and just be persistent. Like if you can do a tablet, a warren, and you start off with 10 leads and end up with 5, and if you are persistent, you'll get it down to none. Takes time though.
All right, thanks, Garry.
Alandi, I'll reinforce a number of the things that Garry has just said in what he's covered in slightly different ways, but certainly spot on. Get rid of the burrows, reduce the breeding potential, because as soon as you get rid of the rabbits, the breeding potential, then you've got less rabbits to worry about. So it's not about killing rabbits, it's about stopping the breeding. That's the key issue.
Yeah. No, that's a very valid point, and that's for sure. If we can actually stop that breeding, it certainly does help make control the rest of the rabbits a lot easier, and to actually be able to put us in a situation where you could eradicate. So one of the other controlling methods we've obviously got is baiting and fumigation. So we're just going to briefly cover these, because these are both techniques that certainly need to be used very correctly, and do have some requirements around their use. So pindone is something that can be used in a more of an urban type or peri-urban type environment. So the other bait poison that people may have heard about is the 1080, but it's something that's not certainly suitable to be used in a peri-urban environment. So again, pindone is either mixed with fresh carrots, or you can get shelf-stable oats, but it certainly needs to be used according to the directions to minimise the risk of off-target poisoning. So that's a key thing that we need to look at. So that's...
I just make a couple of points there with that, because I've actually seen a few instances, because we do work for a rural city wang and do roadside, a lot of roadside rabbit. We use we tablet the holes and then use a rodenator to destroy the holes. But in all our travels around, I've seen a lot of places where they use pindone incorrectly, and you pull up there and see, 4 grass parrots flying off a mound of pindone that's just been freshly tipped out on the edge of the road. And you really, I emphasise with pindone, if you're just going to tip it on the ground, all you'll kill is birds. I've done a lot of baiting of rabbits. You set up cameras on them. We do very little baiting anymore because of we've set up cameras on it, and 90% or 80% of your thing you end up with is parrots. Unless you use a plough and pull it in to the right depth, you really do have to be careful using pindone, because otherwise you'll poison a lot of parrots. So, and that's a big thing with it. So, yeah.
Can I just put in my 2 bobs worth on that one? And that is that to use 1080, for example, you've got to have an agricultural chemical users permit with a 1080 endorsement, or you've got to be a commercial operator like Garry is.
Yeah.
And the whole lot of regulations that are not just regulations, but they are steps to provide risk management and to reduce risk to both native animals, exotic animals like people's dogs and so on, and just the environment in general. And the point that's being made here is if you follow those according to the appropriate protocols, you will minimise the risk of using either of those products, and you can minimise the effect on off-target species by altering the amount of bait that's put out, but also monitoring how much the uptake is and adjusting what you need to put out to actually achieve your job. And to be completely honest, the best way to reduce populations is through poisoning. And however, there are places where that's not totally appropriate, the point having been made already, but that has to be, the judgment around that needs to be made by the professional person who has experience in the area and has the appropriate qualification to do so. The things that Garry's been talking about in terms of bad outcomes, his very stories say they were people who should not have been doing what they had been doing because they weren't following the protocols. So if you follow the protocols, and you will have reduced your risk, but you'll also be reducing the rabbit populations, which is absolutely critical to being able to have an effective program.
Yeah, no, I agree there. It's you've really got to follow the protocol with pindone. It's not safe on birds and that, so you've got to exclude them from it by using it the right method. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I think we can definitely reinforce that if you're looking to use a baiting method, and we'll talk a little bit about Firouztoxin, that if you're not sure, it's certainly worth getting some professional advice before you use those products. So Firouztoxin was the other one that we sort of spoke about briefly before with closing down the warrens. So it's a poisonous gas, and that can be used in the warrens to sort of help fumigate and kill any rabbits that are actually currently in the warrens as you're closing them down. So it certainly can be a useful tool as well, but again, needs to be used very much according to the directions because it is a poisonous gas and it can certainly impact humans and not just animals. So Gary, look, I might let you have a little bit of a talk about this one.
Yeah, with Pindone, Firouztoxin, it works well. It is better and easier if you've got a smoker, so you can fill all the leads in and you know you got a good seal. You do have to fill in your holes. You see people put wet newspaper over and just put a tiny bit of dirt. The rabbits can get through it quite easy and they reopen easy. The harder you compact your holes, the better it is, the less likely they'll open. But it is a lot easier with a smoker because you put all your tablets in the last hole and you don't have any, like if you start filling in a big warren and there's more than 10 holes, if you're throwing a couple of tablets down each lead, by the time you get to the last one, unless you're really quick, you're starting to get fumes coming out of it, and that's not good for your own health. That's where the smoker, at least you know it's all done, and you put your tablets in, you work out how many tablets you need for the area, put your tablets in the last one, fill it in, and job's done. So that's all with it. You just got to be careful that you, especially if you're doing a really large warren, like, yeah, even if you had to fill in half the holes first, but we like using the smoker because it's a lot safer and you just put all your tablets in the last hole.
And there's certainly some recommendations around personal protective equipment that you should be using when you're using Firouztoxin. And look, having seen the use of a smoker when we've been looking at closing down warren systems, it certainly does help because it is quite surprising about where some warren holes might pop up that you haven't seen.
Yeah, and you normally find sort of an extra one right at the end when you think you got them all. It'll start coming out of the grass somewhere and you go and scratch it open and find another hole. And that's their escape hole. And if you've ever done ferreting, they always had an escape hole. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's for sure. So Neil, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think I'll cover it later, Alandi, when I do my presentation, actually.
Yep, no worries. All right, so we're down to the sort of what is your third step within your management plan. So those are sort of the basic things we can use in a peri-urban environment to actually manage our rabbit populations and try and either control or eradicate our rabbits. And obviously in a lot of environments, if we can obviously eradicate, we're certainly better off than if we're just controlling the population numbers. So basically the third step in that is to actually review your plan. So look at what worked and what didn't work for you and what can be improved. Because as we've sort of been saying, that rabbit management is not a once-off task. It does require usually a number of times to actually get that control right and get it down to a level where you want it to be. And it's not something that you can just sort of do for a couple of years and then just leave. It will be something that will need a little bit of monitoring long term. So by having your plan, it actually helps you put in a timeline of when you need to do your various activities so that you can make sure that you get them done in the timelines that they're meant to be done. And there's some good information out there that can help you plan those as well. And then it's also important that you review that and look at where that's taking you from there. So we're just going to briefly talk about the Rural City of Wang program. So
can I just jump in quickly, Alandi? Sorry.
Yep.
We just had a comment there that some local Landcare groups do have smokers available for loan. So yeah, check with your local Landcare group if that's potentially an option for you.
Yep. No, that's certainly good. And Neil, there is a good option for a small smoker that one of the other Landcare groups in Victoria produces.
Yeah. Yes, you can pay big dollars for the commercial variety, but the Ballerine Landcare Network, I think it is, and Sophie Small is their project officer. That group has developed a smoker and it's based on a hairdryer, just an ordinary battery-operated hairdryer, wax in the stelvins that's ignited to produce the smoke, complete with, I think, about 20 pellets for smoking. And the hairdryer, it's a $60 outlay. So it's a really cheap option. And where you might have spent $400 or $500 on the commercial option, you could probably buy half a dozen or more at less than the cost, and they'd be shared around the community more easily that way. So yes, Alandi, if you want to put that out there later on, we can find out exactly the contact details. But Sophie Small, Ballerine Landcare Network, I believe it is.
Yeah, so we can include those contacts when we send out the recording for the webinar.
And Alandi,
Sure.
just before you move on again, we've just had one more question come through. It's asking about do people have to do something about rabbits on their property by law? So this person has a neighbour with several large warrens on her land, and yeah, just wondering what the legalities are about controlling them.
Okay, so we do have a compliance program within the agriculture department. So there are opportunities, I guess, to report that person to those contacts, and they can be found, or we can provide some contacts to those as well. It might also come down to just having a bit of a discussion with that person, and maybe even seeking some support through the Landcare group might be able to help provide some support to that person through advice to actually make them understand or help them understand what they actually need to do. So a lot of the time we find that, particularly through my Landcare work, is that landowners don't actually realise they have a responsibility to look after weeds or rabbits. And then they're really actually not sure how to go about doing it. So there are some options we can do out there, and then kind of as a last resort, we will potentially report that person to our compliance officers within the department, and they will send an official letter out sort of stating that they actually do need to take action and look after that rabbit population and control it. It can be a very challenging task when you've got someone who does have a rabbit problem next to you, but it's about trying to, I guess, get them to engage if possible.
Alandi, there's one more question that's come through, but I wonder if we might let the presentation go on, and it could potentially be answered in the presentation. It's about what to do about rabbits in the driveway and the garden. So I think we'll go further into that as we go along and then come back to it.
Yep. Yeah, no, that sounds good, Vanessa. Thank you. So look, many of you would know that the rural city of Wangaratta has a very good roadside pest, plant and animal program. They're probably one of the best councils as far as the local area goes of trying to actually manage their roadside weed and pest animal problems, which is certainly no easy effort. There are significant issues across all of our roadsides, and they certainly do work very hard. So one of the biggest things is that it is a challenging, it can be challenging working with the communities, but the key to success is also that we actually need private landholders to also help identify where some of the issues are. So particularly when it comes to rabbits, Andrew is certainly more than happy to try and address warrens on roadsides, but it's no point just ringing council and saying, I saw a rabbit run across the road. We actually need you to get out and have a look and see if there are actually warrens on those roadsides. And if so, give an exact location to Andrew so that he can then get contractors like Garry and Kylie to actually go and address the problem. Council doesn't probably have the resources necessarily to be able to send someone out to have a look along a roadside in a various areas. So if you can actually locate the warrens in your local area on your roadsides and let Andrew know where they are, that's a really good starting point for helping the council actually get their job done of rabbit management.
And you only need a general description, like, you know, can be 600 metres, 800 metres from an intersection, just a rough idea where it is, and most of the time we'll find it.
That's right, yeah. So just sort of a roadside and a roughly a reference point, then the contractors are able to locate it. So one of the things that the council actually will be offering over the month of March is support with some peri-urban rabbit management for private landholders. So we will actually be able to help landholders develop their rabbit management plans. And we would really like probably to be able to establish some community-driven projects. And Neil's going to talk more about community-driven rabbit management. So my contact details are there. I'll be actually leading that over the next month. And then following that, we'll have some support available through Garry and Kylie as well, supported by the council, to help some landholders actually do some rabbit management on their own properties and hopefully coordinate that with our roadside stuff. So one of the key things with our rabbit management program as well, which we haven't touched on yet, is being able to do a coordinated approach. So if council and our private landholders are actually all doing their treatment at the same time, which if we're all following our plan and our best practice management, then that actually should happen quite readily. It means that the rabbits don't just move from roadside burrows to private property burrows and back. They actually are excluded from both lots at the same time, which means we have a much better impact of controlling rabbits.
Can I add something there? Over the time, whenever we've had landholders get on board while we're doing roadside stuff and treat their, most of the time you have almost all the time, you have a perfect example. Once you do the roadside and they do their paddocks, generally we end up with none left on the roadside and they have none left in the paddock. So if everyone puts in, it really does make a huge difference. Otherwise, there's other spots where we go back year on year, each year, and just all we're doing is a band-aid fix. We get rid of them off the roadside and then they re-inhabit it again. But when they're doing properties as well, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. So some of the key messages so far that I've probably covered off on is really about making sure you understand how big your problem really is. So you might only see 1 or 2 rabbits running around your property, but in reality, the numbers that you probably actually have on your property are a lot greater than that. The other part is to also know where your rabbits are living. So to actually find the burrows, that's the best way, or where they're living under your buildings, and then close those down or exclude their rabbits from being able to get into those areas. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit more about working with our neighbours, and that certainly is a vital part of actually being able to do a broader management of our rabbit population. And talking to council about where you find warrens on your roadside, that's a key part, because without actually knowing where the warrens are, it's very hard for council to actually be able to go and do the rabbit management. And to investigate your options sort of for your control, and then seek advice if you're not sure. So Neil, the Victorian Rabbit Action Network has a really good website with lots of information and provides a really good starting point. And we've also got expertise through local Landcare groups, the rural city of Wangaratta, and obviously contractors such as Garry and Kylie that can provide that support and that advice where needed. So Neil, I'm going to hand over to you. So if you'd like to share your presentation.
Thank you, Alandi. And let's hope this goes. This will stop others. Yeah. Help me if I need help. Where are we? So yours is still up there.
Yeah.
Mine's not being seen at the moment.
All right. I'm just going to stop the share.
Yep, that'd be good.
And then we'll let you put yours up.
Okay. Ah, here we are. Okay. All right, very good. Okay, so as Alandi's pointed out, there are lots of elements to community-led rabbit control, and Gary's also referred to quite a number of aspects. Now, I'll probably repeat a lot of what's been said, but said in my way, which gives a different tweak to the message and probably puts it in sort of a different perspective. But the goal of my presentation is trying to inspire community action, and to do that, you've got to understand the problem, as was previously said by Alandi. So, are these little fellas a problem? I'm just getting rid of my screen there. To some people they are, to some people they're not. What's happening here? Oh, there we go. We have to use evidence to demonstrate that they are a problem. So some of the evidence that rabbits are a pest vary according to the people who are seeing the situation. If you're a broadacre farmer and your paddock is a paddock of lucerne you've been trying to grow, and you've got this, they're a problem, because obviously they're eating the lucerne that you're trying to grow. Secondly, if you've got big animals, they're likely to break their legs in those holes. I was doing a presentation at Sale just the other day, and someone with horses was expressing exactly that concern. And it's been said before, but the source to rabbit success is what you see in that slide at the moment. It's those burrows, which start off as single stop holes, and over a period of time, they get developed into very complex burrow systems. If you're an urban person, or you've got a town garden, or a garden even out in the bush, and this is your citrus tree, you can see the rabbits there are stripping the bark from the tree and scratching around the roots. The reason they're scratching around the roots is to get moisture and protein, probably to support the breeding, that they need a certain level of protein in order to be able to breed. So there's your citrus tree being threatened. If you're a shire council and you're trying to establish plantations, then they're a problem, because first of all, you know you've got the rabbits, but then it's going to cost you an extra $5 a shot for every tree you try to plant. So that's a significant burden on the budget in terms of developing a project. I can tell you stories, without mentioning names, of developments that's had huge amounts of trees and plants trying to be planted in the particular area. No rabbit control was undertaken prior to that being done, despite all advice that was given, and something like 40% losses was being had. Now, you put your guard up, you think you've got the job covered, but then the bunnies, sorry, I hate to call them bunnies, they're rabbits, they're feral animals, come along, and then they nip off the top of the growing plant. So you've compromised the growth of the plant already. So the problem is we have to see the problem before we can act. And a couple of stories that have already been told tonight exemplify that. Some people don't even realise they've got a problem. The challenge is that we must act collectively, and everyone has to have a common goal and a belief that control is possible. It certainly is possible, because it's been achieved in many different places and situations. Now, the whole thing about effective rabbit control is that it has to be integrated, it has to be strategic, it has to be ongoing. Garry said that a number of times, the persistent factor, and there's another element there which is coordinated. Now, what I'm about to show you is the recipe for addressing rabbit problems, and if any single one of these parts is taken out of the picture, then you compromise the effectiveness of the outcome. So what we start off with is developing an action and timeline. And the timeline is critical, because to do certain things at certain times of the year, which are the wrong times of the year, you might as well be blowing in the wind, because you're wasting your time. So the first thing is, as already been said, monitor the numbers. And I'll talk about how to do that in a minute. That usually happens sort of in a broad acre context, but any time if you like, but normally around about November, after breeding has finished and rabbit numbers are at their highest. You then reduce the numbers, and I talked earlier about poisoning being the best option for that. If you don't reduce the numbers, then every burrow that you fumigate, for example, is likely to be reopened by the rabbits that aren't in there, because they're not all going to be in the burrows at the same time. So that happens January, February, reducing the number of rabbits. Then once you've reduced the number of rabbits, oh, and by the way, reducing the number of rabbits can happen through outbreaks of disease like RHDV and other diseases that impact rabbit numbers. Destroying the burrows is absolutely critical. That is the key to the whole cycle, because as has already been said, if they can't breed, there are minimum chances of rabbits being in your environment. And I'll just quote my case on my own property of 700 acres. We started off back in 1983 when we bought it. In 2.5 weeks, we caught 3 weeks, we caught 2,500 pair, 5,000 rabbits. Now, 25 years later, persistence, Garry, persistence, we have 700 acres and you don't see a rabbit on our place. And the reason for that largely is because of the 600 hours of destruction of rabbit burrows that we've undertaken. And I'll explain how that can be done later. But just superficially, it's about ripping the burrows, or implosion and broadacres. And if you have to, then fumigation is effective. But as Garry said earlier, you have to be very persistent, because to close a burrow down through fumigation and continual follow-up, it takes probably anything up to 10 years to close a burrow down at the outside. So that happens during March to April, May. And then after your ripping and implosion and follow-up is concerned, you monitor the treated areas to see if there are any reopenings, and you retreat any reopenings. If ripping's been effective, as in done by quality operators, similarly with the implosion, then the reopenings will be an absolute minimum. If you've been fumigating your burrows and they're reopened, please take note of, if it's a little tiny hole, and if you can see my screen, a tiny hole like this, then that means that the rabbit has dug out from inside the burrow. So the Firouztoxin hasn't got to the rabbit in the burrow. If it's scratched out like you normally see burrows, then that means the rabbit that was outside is scratched in, and it usually indicates that the rabbit population wasn't reduced significantly enough before the fumigation or the burrow destruction was undertaken. Next part. Hang on, I'm going backwards here. Here we go. Next part is you now monitor your numbers again with the count that Alandi referred to before, and that should be immediately after your retreatment of burrows and so on. But generally April, May, that will be after the ripping and destruction of burrows. We've talked about removal of harbour. I refer to it as harbour rather than habitat, because habitat goes with healthy environments. Harbour is the sort of thing that harbours rabbits in a way that it gives them cover to be able to dig burrows or shelter from predators, as has already been talked about. And that's an ongoing thing. You do that right throughout the year. So what you see on the screen at the moment is an annual program that has to be followed up time after time after time. The beauty of it is, as your success increases, the amount of work that you have to do decreases. So go back to when I was talking about my property. We used to spend 3 and 4 weeks of rabbit control in those earlier days of 1980s. And now our rabbit control basically is when we're mustering sheep, do we see anything? Do we see any signs? So it's allowed us to do a lot more productive things around our farm. So the community action thing, the elements of an effective integrated rabbit control program are these. Firstly, you ensure all the participants understand what the rabbit control recipe is. Now, I haven't really given you detail about that. It's rather difficult to do so in such a short presentation, but we'll pick it up a little bit in a minute. The next thing is to talk to and plan with your neighbours and Landcare group. It is absolutely critical that you talk to your neighbours, because if you're trying to do it on your own, you're really fighting a battle that's going to be a continuing battle, as been referred to already. And this picks up the fact that it needs to be as big a landscape as possible. So as much area as you can cover, and Garry touched on this when he's talking about roadsides and landholders' land, the bigger the area that you can cover, the more effective your program's going to be. You'll only get that landscape-wide thing if you're talking with your neighbours and acting as a group. The thing about landscape-wide is that they don't stop at fences. Rabbits can get through fences, under fences, over fences, and things like wombats, kangaroos, echidnas put holes in fences anyway. So exclusion fences, unless it's a small property, are problematic in terms of trying to maintain their exclusion capacity. You need to establish as a group your aspirational goals in reducing the number of rabbits. Less than 1 rabbit per hectare is enough to cause this sort of thing. In this picture, you can see there is not a blade of grass that is endemic grass there. All of the grass that you can see is introduced exotic weeds. In particular, that's heliotrope mostly. Alandi talked about small plants getting wiped out earlier. This is a significantly large acacia tree. The reason why it's got that beautiful haircut across the bottom is because the rabbits have eaten off all of the foliage underneath because they needed the food. But at the same time, the cover of the top provides them with protection from predators, and so they're quite safe there. At the same time, all of the little critters that should be living there haven't got anywhere to go to eat and to nest or whatever, as Alandi said. And then add in addition to that, any seedling that might be growing from that tree gets wiped out because of the rabbits around it. So the impact of rabbits is they're like Monty Python, they're killer rabbits, but they don't do it by going around killing things. They just alter and manufacture, they engineer the environment to suit their own needs. So the road to success, the process needs to include these ingredients. One, the community education. You have field days and workshops. The field days to demonstrate the tools for implementing control methods, and all of these methods have to be used in conjunction. You can't just use one and expect it to do the job. The workshops are about getting what the community aspirations are about, trying to identify goals and establish work plans and so on. You explore the success of other communities. So there'll be other communities around who have been successful or are in the same position as your group. And so you tap into the information that they can provide you because of their success. The community consultation, in other words, talking to the people around you, engenders ownership of the solution. If you don't get that, what people expect is someone to come riding in their helicopter and solve the problem and shoot off again. When in fact it's a community problem, it needs to be a community solution, and therefore the community has to own that solution by developing it. So the community then would set up a working group, and you don't need everybody in the community, just so long as you've got this trusted group of people to get together and set targets and develop aspirational goals. You establish systems of implementation for the processes, and there's a lot more behind that than just that one line, but we can cover that another time. The group might start to source funding to support community action, and Victorian Landcare grants provide some form of funding for various actions there. It could be education, so supporting your workshops. It can be for ripping and destroying of rabbit burrows. And then there's the broader community education. So if you're getting together as a group, you want the rest of the people around you to know about what you're trying to achieve and what you're going to do going about it, so that you've got then the invitation to those people to be included in the program, and therefore extend the landscape that you're going to cover, and hence the effectiveness of your program. So the elements of an effective integrated rabbit control program. So we've been talking about the community action part before, as in getting the community together. These are the things. And as I said, this is repeating what's been said before, but it's worth repeating. So in the first year, you develop your action plan. That action plan would be count the rabbits, a number of rabbits, and you should do it twice, one night, one the next night, because as has been said already, sometimes the rabbit that hasn't yet come out of the burrow doesn't get counted. So the next night it might be out of the burrow or out of the harbour where it's hiding. You can do that in broad acres and a ute and spotlight like that, but you can also do it just by getting a group of your neighbours together and walk from one property to the other along the roadside, just so long as you know where you've travelled, where you've walked, and you repeat that on the second night. So it's important you repeat exactly the same route and you count the rabbits each time. Now, in a broader acre,
Neil, just a sec on that.
Yeah.
With a lot of the contractors and that nowadays, with thermal imaging, there's a massive difference. You can do really good counts on rabbits. We've found probably tenfold of what you'd see with a spotlight with the thermal imaging.
Yeah.
You see so many. We actually do a lot of programs now where we're shooting them with thermal imaging, where we can go through an area and shoot 1,000 rabbits out in one night. It's just no problem at all. But anyway, on with where you are. Thank you.
Yeah, and just if I can pick up Gary's point, the thermal imaging is fantastic, but not everyone has access to that. They certainly do have an LED torch or something, and that's quite achievable in a small community. And may I point this out, that you've mentioned it, Garry, shooting is not a way of controlling rabbits. It's just a matter of killing rabbits. The
Yeah.
controlling rabbits comes about from stopping their breeding. So, Garry, thanks for bringing that up. It was a good opportunity to bring it in, but you're absolutely right about thermal imaging. The light doesn't scare the rabbits. They just think that nothing's happening and they're operating as per normal. But just to explain how you might do a transect, a spotlight count, if you've got enough people in your community going, then you can actually do a walk. And this covers 3 kilometres, this particular example. So each of those sectors across the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 500 metres of walking. And below it, this part is the first night's count. So in the first 500 metres, 4 rabbits were counted. Second 500 metres, 6 rabbits, and so on. So that led to a total of 30 rabbits. And it also shows you where the most rabbits were and where the least rabbits were. So you get a better idea of the distribution of the rabbits. Then it was repeated on the second night. And so you got a similar sort of pattern, but a less number of rabbits. It could have been that that night was a windy night. So you also take note of the conditions that were prevailing, because that indicates whether the rabbits will be out and about or not. So your count should be just after dark, when the rabbits are most active and more likely to be seen. So this is a way of getting data to establish how big your problem is. The next thing is map where they're feeding. So as you're going around, watch where they're feeding. If they're feeding on your lawn, that's where later you'd put out your 1080, sorry, not 1080 in the town, but you'd put out pindone or some other form of poisoning, because you've got to take the bait to where they're feeding. You don't put it just anywhere. Note where they're running to assist in finding the burrows. That's been referred to before. And you can often tell where they're running to either by watching them in the light, or you just have a look in the grass and see the little tracks that they leave through the grass. They often lead from or to a burrow. Find all the holes in each burrow, and we've heard about the smoker being used for that. And just add to your data by recording how many holes you've got. As Garry said before, if you've got a burrow with 10 holes in it, you fumigate it and it gets reopened, but there are only 5 holes open, then you're starting to make progress. And so that's a measure of success. Ultimately, obviously, you want none to be reopened, but the number of holes for a burrow tells you how complex a particular burrow is going to be. Map where the burrows are. So literally map where they are. Now, this particular map, as you can tell, is a golf course, and it's a golf course not too far from where I live. They had a problem. This is a peri-urban area, obviously. There are 60 rabbit burrows that they mapped on there. And when I first spoke to the committee, because they asked me to help out, they didn't even know where one of them was. So this was a very important thing in terms of raising awareness amongst the community and making it easy for the likes of Garry, who's going to come along and do work on those burrows. He doesn't have to look for them. It's already known where they are. So map where the burrows are, reduce the total number of rabbits. And we've talked about that. If you can't poison them, then that really compromises the whole picture, because your reopenings when you shut down burrows are going to be much more prevalent. Destroy all the burrows, and destroying the burrows, yes, you can try to dig them out, but if you like the situation at Sale the other day, we did a profile through a burrow, and that burrow went down to 1.5 metres in depth. And that takes me back to my old ferreting days, Garry, when trying to dig out a ferret, it's a pretty tall order when you're trying to get that far down. So destroying the burrow, if you're ripping, it has to be down deep enough to get to those deepest parts of the burrow. But destroying the burrow with closing them off, as Garry was talking, requires persistence above all. On the broadacre, you use a 20-tonne excavator. That's the best way to go. Triple tine ripper gets through it fast, but if you have a look underneath the triple tine ripper, you'll see a single tine ripper there to get into the tighter spots. You're not going to have that in the urban area, but that's the ants' pants when it comes to destroying burrows. You can use implosion. Now, implosion can be done in urban areas. In fact, back there at that golf club, all of those burrows were either treated by fumigation. Only a few of them had to be done like that because it was near water pipes and so on. But where there were no water pipes, implosion was used. And that's not explosion. It's just enough explosive in the burrow to destroy the structure of the burrow and shut it down. So there are two possible methods of destroying the burrows. And as I said earlier, effective rabbit control is not about killing rabbits. And that's why I picked up on Gary's point about shooting rabbits, 1,000 rabbits.
The thing is, though, shooting's a bit like poisoning. You're only killing rabbits.
Exactly right, Gary. And it can be good for picking up the last few, but it's not good in terms of thinking that you're controlling rabbits. And my story there is back in the 70s, we would get 200 pair a night for 6 weeks at a time, every night going over the same ground. And that kept on going until we started doing something about this integrated approach.
Yeah, you've got to do habitat destruction.
Absolutely.
Well,
You've got to destroy the burrows and remove the harbour. So effective rabbit control is about reducing their chance of survival. And that's exactly what Gary was just talking about. You've got to get rid of the burrows.
Oh.
I can't quite see what that says behind there. Can you read it to me, Gary? Just
Sorry?
the bottom part of that. I've got a banner across the screen.
No, I've got it too.
It says, and this is based upon destroying their burrows.
Oh, right. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you.
I was looking at the bit behind Vanessa.
Yeah, right. Okay. So
Yes,
the next part is monitor the treated burrows for reopened holes. So you go back and check whether they're reopened. You retreat them with fumigation. And like I said before, check whether the rabbit's coming from inside or outside. If it's coming from outside, probably because the rabbit that should have been in the burrow when you fumigated wasn't there. A good way of making sure they're in the burrows is to either go around and make a lot of noise and chase the rabbits in there, or have a dog with muzzle on so they're not going to hurt the rabbit and chase them into the burrow. So the point being...
A lot of the holes, you do get reopened by foxes. If there's a lot of dead rabbits in there, they smell and they open them. So really, as soon as you do tablets, within a few days after, you should actually go and check your holes and refill them in again.
Absolutely, and I can't reinforce that too much. And even if you're not even a couple of days later, you know, if you're in the urban area, you've got a small enough area, you can do it every day, and that'll give you an idea of how quick and thick the rabbits are, I guess. Next one. You can use exclusion fencing, especially if you've got a small property, but it must be of a particular standard of fencing. It's got to have an apron on the outside so the rabbits don't dig under. It's got to be a certain height, and the netting has to be no more than a 30mm sized hole. And even then, a kitten rabbit can get through them and grow up on your side of the fence and end up eating your veggies and your roses. So exclusion fencing is an option, but all you're doing is excluding the problem. You're not solving the problem. So you repeat the spotlight count to see how successful you've been. And there are a couple of points there. Can someone help me with what's been listed again, please?
The last point is evaluate the program, what worked well and why.
Yep, and so this picks up Alandi's point. So as a group, you sit down, you say, what was good about that, what worked well, and why was it working well? And a lot of this is often about all people working together. Things will work well if people act as a team. And then the next part, what needs to be improved. And you'll notice I'm not talking about failure. There's no such thing as failure, except in two situations. One, you don't do anything. That's absolute failure, and it's not an option. And two, failure is if you give up too soon. You need to keep going. As Gary said many times, persistence is the key order.
Yeah.
Right. So ultimate success, ongoing success will be achieved when as many adjacent landholders as possible are working together. Roadsides are included. Include the Shire in the program, and already up your way, you have that on board. And knowing Andrew as I do, because Andrew is a graduate of the Victorian Rabbit Action Network boot camp, he has all of this under his belt. He knows exactly what's going on and how to go about it. Don't you, Gary, Andrew? He's got his mic turned off.
Yeah, he's trying
to I hope I do.
In the quiet.
Yeah, no, Andrew's spot on. So the program needs to be coordinated. It's not just a bunch of people operating like loose cannons. You need somebody to be the go-to person who organises stuff to happen in a way that the cycle is undertaken at the right time. So what you're doing is you want all the things that involved in the cycle to happen at the right time of the year and at the same time by all people. So if someone's reducing their numbers of rabbits today, but 3 weeks later the neighbour's doing it, then that's a waste of time. It needs to be done all the time, at the same time at least. The program is ongoing and it's on an annual basis. People involved reap the reward. You've got to be rewarded for your efforts, and a part of that reward is in success. So celebrate your successes, and the more people who become involved in the program, the more successful you'll be. And the reason for that is you'll cover a greater extent of your landscape. Above all, be persistent. After all, we're smarter than rabbits, aren't we? And success is measured not by the number of rabbits that you kill, but by how many remain.